This past week in my class at Messiah University, there was kind of an awkward moment. The class is called Interpreting the Bible, and we were discussing Hebrews 10:25, which says, "Let us not give up meeting together." That verse teaches Christians to be committed to gathering regularly, consistently. And I asked the students if Messiah University was a church. And if so, maybe then they didn't need to participate in churches nearby. Messiah is a Christian university, and they pretty much agreed that even though Messiah has so much Christian emphasis to it, there are elements of Messiah that are very different from a church. It's a temporary educational institution. It includes mostly people who are 18 to 22 years old. Churches are multi-generational. Churches hopefully last more than 4 years. Churches have a wider purpose than just simply education. Churches have this purpose of accomplishing and pursuing the mission of Jesus in the world. And so I asked them, because the local church is so different from Messiah University, then shouldn't Messiah University require those students to attend local churches each week? Messiah does require them to attend chapel services on campus, interestingly. It's about once a week throughout the semester. Students all thought that was a bad idea. They agreed that it would be legalistic for Messiah to require them to go to church. Far better, they said, that the students exercise their free will and participate in a church because they want to. So far, so good. I was agreeing with them. And here's where it got awkward. We then talked about the fact that Messiah does require them to go to chapel. And one student then spoke up and said they felt that chapel this semester was boring, uninspiring, and they even named one of the chapel speakers they didn't like in front of the whole class. Now, I want my classes to be places where there's openness and opinions can be shared and where people can disagree with one another, but I shut down that discussion. I felt it was not going in a direction of the fruit of the Spirit like we've been talking about. And I later emailed the student asking if they had ever shared their opinion directly with that particular speaker. Jesus taught us to go to the person who we have a concern with, right? But so often, that kind of reconciliation, that kind of healing, that kind of restorative conversation just doesn't happen. Instead, we get upset. We talk to other people about that person, and then we either ignore what happened, or in the context of a church, sometimes we just leave the church. And we justify it to ourselves by saying that we don't want to make waves with that person. We don't want to make waves in the church. But we sure are okay making waves behind their back to others. Or we keep quiet about it completely because we're afraid to actually talk with the person. And yet, what does Scripture say about this? So turn with me to 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 13. If you're reading one of the Bibles in your pew, it's page 958. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 13, page 958. I'm going to be starting right there in the middle of verse 13. It's kind of where we left off. And just look at that one phrase. 1 Thessalonians 5:13, again, that's page 958. Right in the middle of verse 13, this phrase says, "Live in peace with each other." I want to begin by talking about the bookends of that. Live with each other. That phrase reflects the practice of the early church to their view about faith. It was so much more than just a worship service or rituals that were somehow religious. The phrase live with each other tells us that we disciples of Jesus are part of a new family. Local churches are properly viewed as communities of people who are living together. Being a part of that community involves attending worship services for sure, but so much more as well. Living together. Now, don't get me wrong, Paul is not suggesting that we need to live in the same building together. Christians could choose to do that, of course. He's also not saying don't do that. And some have tried it. Some have tried communal living. And quite frankly, it has mixed results. We here in Lancaster County know of one, right? The Ephrata Cloisters. How many of you have been to the Ephrata Cloisters and have toured it? You really need to. I encourage you to do it. You've heard me say this before. If you've been here for many years, I've toured the Ephrata Cloisters, and I find that place really weird and eerie. I get cult vibes when I go there, to be quite honest with you. There's been the Bruderhof, or the Catholic Worker. Maybe you've heard of some of those. I mean, we could do it here if we really wanted to. What do you think? Should we convert classrooms into living spaces, sell all of our homes, and just move in the building together? Nah, we don't really want to do it. No. Now, let me repeat here. Paul is not suggesting that that's what he means by living together. He's primarily suggesting that in a church family, we see ourselves as doing life together. It's really this expansive vision of what it means to be a part of a church family. It also reveals that we can get the wrong idea about what church is intended to be. We can get the idea sometimes from our culture or from even our Christian practice that church is intended to be what happens in this room or this building on Sundays from 9 a.m. to 11:30. But let me ask you, did Jesus call his disciples to run worship production companies? He did not. And it seems to me that the vast emphasis of what churches do is basically run worship production companies. Now again, holding worship services like we are doing it right now, I sure hope it's not totally wrong. That include music and preaching, and hopefully it's very encouraging and inspiring. It's not wrong. But if we put an overemphasis on it, it can become wrong. Even idolatrous. We can desire worship experiences that give us this emotional charge and think that it was what it was supposed to be. Or the common phrase that I have heard for many, many years is, I want the preacher's sermons to feed me. I want to go to a worship service and feel like I got fed. And if a particular sermon is a dud in someone's opinion, they might say, I just didn't get fed today. It's kind of weird to talk like that, right? As if I'm a bird regurgitating vomit into your... I mean, that's what... I don't know. I feel, to me, maybe it's because I'm the preacher, I feel the whole thing is really a weird way to talk and think. But I think what's actually really more important is that viewpoint of fed or not fed is a tiny, microscopic view of what a church family is supposed to be. There is so much more. Think about how expansive the idea is when we label it a group of people who live with each other. That means we're caring deeply about one another. And that kind of deep caring goes beyond just a worship production in a Sunday morning worship service. It goes beyond reading each other's social media posts and clicking like. People who live with each other are spending time together in significant ways. Yeah, it includes maybe social media and seeing each other at worship services. It could include texting and getting on the phone. It could be, most importantly of all, in person. Being present with them when they're struggling, following up with them, having those deep, meaningful conversations, accountability, sacrificing time and energy for one another, and then choosing to follow up and check in again and again and again, and caring for them and how they're doing, especially when they're in need, which is treating others just like God would treat them. And so, a community of Christians live with each other, as Paul says in 1 Thessalonians 5:13, by opening our arms, our eyes, and our lives to include more and more of one another. It's sacrificing our time and energy to welcome new people. It's seeking ways to regularly, consistently care deeply for each other. I think it can start by checking in on Sunday mornings. Our gatherings are very good in that sense because we're actually all here together. It's a great time to connect with people. But take it deeper. Go beyond. And ask yourself, what would that look like? I think the early church is a wonderful example of this. Let me just read a couple passages. I hope they're very familiar to you. We've studied them before, and yet they're so radical almost, so eye-opening that I think we need to hear them again, but not as radical as normal. These passages I'm about to read to you, I want you to really hear the words and think to yourselves, that's the way it's supposed to be. The first one is in Acts chapter 2. You don't need to turn there. You can if you want, of course. Acts chapter 2, verses 42 through 47. These passages describe a different way of being a church family than what I think we're accustomed to here in American Christianity. Here's the first one, Acts chapter 2, verses 42 through 47. The earliest description of what happened when the followers of Jesus lived with each other as a church family. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And now another one, just a few chapters later, months after that first one, might have been a couple years, we don't know exactly the timetable, but notice how similar they sound. This is Acts chapter 4, starting in verse 32. All the believers were one in heart and mind. No one claimed that any of their possessions was their own, but they shared everything they had. With great power, the apostles continued to testify to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus. And God's grace was so powerfully at work in them all that there were no needy persons among them. For from time to time, those who owned land or houses sold them, brought the money from the sales, and put it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to anyone who had need. There's just wonderful descriptions of church family, of life with each other. Did you hear the sacrificial approach that they took? Do you see their passion for unity? I think it's perhaps the clearest description of what a church family should be. And where did they learn to be a church family like that? Did they arrive at that model after years and years of experimentation and failure and try a new way and try a different way? No. They learned it from the mouth of Jesus himself. They learned it from the action of Jesus as they watched him and walked with him for 3 years. These descriptions of the church, the early church, are about people who had walked with Jesus, his disciples, his other followers. They learned from Jesus how to live with each other. They had no buildings, no programs, no Sunday worship services with musicians and preachers. Did they worship? For sure. Was there preaching and teaching? For sure. But all of it was in the context of a whole lifestyle. Seems they lived in their own homes, but they shared life together, willing to open those homes, give up those homes, sell those homes. They went deep, sacrificially deep. So I invite you to evaluate how that picture of life together in the church compares or contrasts with your own. How deep are you going? How can you go deeper? How often are you asking others in the church family how they're doing? Are they struggling? Are they stressed out? Are they okay? And then following up with them. I have to ask myself the same questions as well. It's not like I'm perfect at this. But what we see in the early church's practice of life together is their sacrificial generosity of their selves, their time, their possessions. And through it all, they had unity. And that ties directly into what Paul talks about in the phrase I skipped over in 1 Thessalonians 5:13. He didn't just say live with each other. He said live in peace with each other. Peace. Peace is a massive concept for the Apostle Paul and for anyone who, like Paul, would have been raised in a Jewish context. You may have heard the Hebrew, the Jewish word shalom, peace. It is not just simply, though, peace between warring parties where they come together and strike a peace accord. Shalom in the Hebrew mindset is wholeness and harmony and unity and flourishing. It's very much in line with what Jesus himself said in John 10:10 when he said, I have come that they might have life and life abundantly. It's the kind of life when people are thriving. Not necessarily saying that life is perfect. That it has to be without any kind of pain or without any kind of hardship. That's not what Jesus is talking about. Because we're humans, and the way the world is, we know there will always be hardship. But he's saying that in the midst of whatever we are going through, we can still experience that abundant life, that thriving. And now Paul harnesses that word, that peace, and he applies it to a church family. We have peace. We are to pursue peace and wholeness and unity and flourishing within our church family. Now, you might think to yourself, how do you do that, even in a congregation our size, which we're not a mega church by any means? Sounds like you're saying you have to have these really close, flourishing relationships with everyone, and that's not the case. It's impossible. I think it's impossible to have best friendships with even a tiny church. Some people say that really we can only have best friendships with maybe 3 to 4 people. Faith Church, we're just right at about 100 people that would call Faith Church home. It's just simply not possible to have best friendships with that many people, and that's okay. Small groups that spend time with each other are okay. Every now and then the word clique gets used. There's a clique here or there's a clique there in the church family. In my view, however, it's normal when people spend more time with each other and become close friends. Where a group can cross a line into poor behavior is when they are so exclusive, they refuse to include others. They don't welcome others. They don't talk with others. They shun others. And so I think it is possible to live in peace with everyone in the church family while at the same time having a closer group of friends in that same church family. It's why we encourage everyone to get connected to one of our small groups. It's why we encourage small groups to go deeper with each other. It's why we encourage you to consider staying and attending one of our classes where we can talk further and go deeper, because those classes are smaller groupings. Our Wednesday prayer meeting is another wonderful opportunity to come and gather with a smaller grouping and share life. These are all different versions of smaller groupings where you can enter into relationship with people and go deeper for flourishing, for abundant life. Another aspect of living in peace with one another is the reality that we will not always agree with each other. Hear what Paul has to say about that as I continue reading in 1 Thessalonians 5, starting in verse 14. He says, "And we urge you, brothers and sisters, warn those who are idle and disruptive. Encourage the disheartened, help the weak, be patient with everyone. Make sure that nobody pays back wrong for wrong, but always strive to do what is good for each other and for everyone else." Our culture across our nation has shifted to the extremes. We especially see this in cultural and political ideology, where there used to be a large middle that was the majority in our nation. Now, even that middle had people who might have leaned one way or the other in their ideology. They chose to have a perspective of welcoming different ideas, even if, in the end of the day, they disagreed with one another. But in the last 20, 30-ish years, there's been a movement to the polar opposites. And so to be considered a true proponent of an ideological side, you must hold the extreme view of that side. And that extreme includes viewing the other pole as the enemy. So therefore, if you're living at one of the poles, you say, we are 100% right and they are 100% wrong. In fact, they're not only 100% wrong, they are dangerous, they're enemies of the state, and thus we are justified in doing whatever it takes to marginalize them, disenfranchise them, silence them. That's outrage culture. It is so present in our society from both ideological sides that it has influenced Christians. We Christians have been discipled by our culture. We've been taught by our cultural leaders, and especially our political leaders, that it is not only okay, it is normal to be outraged at those who think differently from you. Therefore, when there are disagreements in a church family, we can be tempted to express ourselves with harsh outrage. That outrage, that lack of graciousness, that lack of gentleness, that lack of kindness is contrary to the fruit of the Spirit. We Christians are called to be peaceable inside the church family and outside the church family. We are called to be gentle, humble, kind, patient, like we talked about today. Loving in our own church families, in our communities, and wherever we go. That practice of the fruit of the Spirit gets tested, however, because even inside a church family, there are all sorts of things we can disagree about. Because we're human. We have opinions. It's part and parcel of being human. But we also have to remember we've been discipled by our culture to have strong opinions. It's become commonplace for people in a church family to also have strong opinions and to express them with outrage about what media is appropriate, about what substances are appropriate to put in our bodies, about how to spend money, about, I could go on and on, so many. One of the things is even about how many or which of our church programs and events our church family should be at. And that's what I say to myself, because I can fixate on how many people were there. Pastors get stuck on that kind of thing. And whether we express it loudly and publicly, or whether we express it kind of with subtlety and quietly behind the scenes or a little side conversation here and there, outrage is outrage. When we are discipled by Jesus, though, we do not give in to outrage culture. Surely we can have opinions. Yes, that's right, that's normal. But we share them for the purpose of living in peace with each other. And we do so with the expectation of unity. Expressing ourselves with the fruit of the Spirit of love, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self-control. When we are discipled by Jesus, we do not need to win arguments. We welcome other opinions, always keeping that door open that we might be wrong about something. That we might need a shift in our perspective, that maybe we don't have all the understanding that we think we have. Again, it is not wrong to have an opinion. It's not wrong to have a strong opinion. So long as we admit to ourselves, and I mean truly admit to ourselves and others, that we're open and we're willing to change our mind. That is a peaceable, humble, teachable attitude. And I think what undergirds this idea of living at peace with each other in a church family, is the assumption that there should only be a very, very few non-negotiables in a church family. Have you ever heard that phrase? In essentials, unity. In non-essentials, liberty. In all things, charity. It's an ancient phrase, been around for a long, long time in Christian theology. And there are 3 levels to that quote. There's the essentials, the non-essentials, and the all things. And I encourage you to think about them as a pyramid, with essentials at the top, and that top should be tiny. And each successive level gets bigger and bigger. Essentials at the top are non-negotiable Christian doctrine. What are those essentials? I kind of want to open the floor for your opinions, but you notice how that word opinion is right in there, because we might even disagree what the essentials are. Again, that's normal, that's human, that's happened throughout the history of the church. But they could be something like this. The essential Christian doctrines. Jesus Christ is Lord. He is 100% God and 100% man. Jesus Christ rose again in the body. God is Father, Spirit, Son. And God the Spirit fills all true followers of Jesus, so together they can usher in Jesus' kingdom of righteousness and justice in the world. Maybe you want to keep going with some essentials. I'm going to cut you off. I kind of want to keep going in some, because there's some things I didn't talk about, right? But we have peace with each other in the church family. We have unity by saying, let's just get around those few essentials and say, that's our common unity. And from there, we are together, work for the kingdom. And think about how much I didn't include in that top level. Think about how much can divide us, or how much has divided the Christian church throughout the ages. Catholic versus Protestant versus Orthodox. Does God choose salvation for us, or do we choose Him? What about baptism and the Lord's Supper? What about in contemporary Christianity, the hot button issues of divorce and abortion and LGBTQ and role of women and men in the church and on and on? We could just go on and on and on. These are the things that divide us. And what so often happens is that people disagree and they say, I disagree so strongly because that's an essential. I think that's what they've done. They've taken a non-essential, they've moved it up to the essential and say, we're going to start a new denomination because of that. Or a new church. Because quite frankly, let's be honest, it can be really difficult to be in relationship, to live peacefully with each other in a church when we disagree with each other. It's hard to be in relationship with people whom you have strong disagreements with. But that's what a church family is. It's normal. We live at peace with each other even though we might disagree. I think all of those issues that have divided the church over the centuries and continue to this day, they need to be in the non-essential level. And the quote suggests that in the non-essentials, we have liberty. Liberty means allowing others, including others in the same church family, freedom of will to decide what to believe, even if it differs from us. Freedom means we do not have permission to throw the fruit of the Spirit in the trash and act with outrage toward them. Instead, we agree to disagree in love, in patience, in kindness. And the key word of Paul's teaching today, in peace. Now, look at verses 14 and 15 again. I read them already. Warn those who are idle and disruptive. Idle means lazy. We actually talked about that a few weeks ago in this same sermon series. So I'm going to skip over that and go to the word disruptive. If there are people in the church who are being disruptive, Paul says we're to warn them. Living at peace with each other means we are not disruptive. Now again, there will be opinions about what is disruptive. Lots of opinions. One person might say, I wasn't being disruptive, I was just speaking the truth. Sometimes the truth hurts. They might even say they were speaking the truth in love. It's true. Sometimes communicating the truth in love hurts. And so they might say, I wasn't being disruptive. You just didn't like the truth that I was speaking. That really gets messy, though, doesn't it? Just because one person thinks they have a corner on the truth, it doesn't mean they actually have a corner on the truth. Remember humility and teachability. We do much better to be quick to say, here's my opinion. And I realize it's just my opinion, and I could be wrong. So can we discuss it together? Invite a conversation, a true conversation, one that doesn't assume authority or correctness, but is willing to second guess itself. There have been many times in the life of the church family when those with strong opinions, those who are not afraid to boldly proclaim their opinions, do so as if their opinion is not an opinion, but it is the one certain way. And if anyone disagrees with them, they're wrong. My grandfather used to say that. He was a theology professor at Lancaster Bible College, and he would teach his students who would disagree with him in class, you can disagree with me, but you'll be wrong for the rest of your life. Now, he was saying that with a bit of a twinkle in his eye, but I think deep down he probably believed it. That utter confidence is disruptive and has no place in the life of a church family. Even if they're convinced that they are just speaking the truth in love, they're not being humble and teachable. They're being disruptive, and they should be warned. Now, notice how else Paul describes peace with each other in verses 14 and 15. Encourage the disheartened. Help the weak. Be patient with everyone. Make sure that nobody pays back wrong for wrong, but always strive to do what is good for each other, for everyone else. These last few sentences, I think Paul is just so clear in his otherness. To do what Paul teaches in verses 14 and 15, it requires us to have an outward-looking, selfless approach. To encourage the disheartened, we must first be people who look beyond ourselves. We're looking for other people. How are they doing? We're thinking about them. We're caring about them. I think about this every Sunday. Are there people sitting by themselves? Are there people who are new? Are there, who is in need? Who can we reach out to? Give up the familiarity of your seat. Because we almost always sit in the exact same seats every single week. Step out of your comfort zone, push through the feelings of awkwardness, and go to them. Introduce yourself. Start asking questions to them. I'm going to bring up something I've shared before. It's what one of my seminary professors called the 60-40 rule of discussions. 60-40 rule. This is Dave Dorsey, just one of my favorite profs. He had just really great way of looking at things. He said this: ask questions of other people when you're conversing with them 60% of the time. You do the majority of the listening, in other words. Let them do talking 60% of the time. But he also said, but 40% of the time, you should talk too. Now, we might think that selflessness would mandate we would ask questions and we would listen 100% of the time so that the focus is never on us. Isn't that what selflessness means? He said no, actually, because if the other person is talking 100% of the time, that's a lopsided conversation. It's not actually a conversation, it's a monologue, and relationships are not built on monologues. In fact, if we're only ever asking questions of the other person, we're kind of teaching them that it's okay for them to just give monologues to us all the time. And that's not okay in a relationship or a conversation. Conversation is give and take. Talking and active listening and asking questions. So pay attention about how much you are talking when you're in a conversation with someone. Initiate the questions. And if you read the Gospels, you'll see this. Jesus is a master question asker. He's constantly asking people questions. It's astounding how Jesus is just questioning. What do you want me to do for you? What about this? What about that? So if you're in the lobby, if you're in the sanctuary, if you're in the fellowship hall on a Sunday, look for those people. Instead of sitting at your normal table in the fellowship hall, because I know what, there's this table of that people. It's the same every single Sunday. Mix it up. Go to people. Talk with them. And then follow up. This is key. Because remember what I said earlier. We cannot limit relationship to Sunday mornings for 1 hour, which really isn't 1 hour, because for the most part on Sunday mornings, because this is a worship production company, oftentimes we're just sitting quietly listening to what's happening. Instead, if we really want to build relationships in the church family, it's going to happen outside of the building on other days, other times. Reach out midweek. Don't wait for next Sunday. This is the foundation for living at peace with each other, especially when people are hurting. Now finally, scan down to verse 26. We kind of tacked this one on because I think it relates to living at peace with one another in the church family. Verse 26, greet all God's people with a holy kiss. What in the world? It was simply a cultural practice. It's actually a practice that is observed in many cultures around the world still today. Kind of that peck on the cheek. Some cultures do it quick on one side of the cheek, quick on the other side of the cheek. And maybe some of you even do that in your own families and so on. It's actually, I've noticed, it's not really a kiss. It's more of an air kiss. Mwah, mwah. Your lips aren't even making contact with anything. But what is it for? It symbolizes closeness and friendship and family and love. And that's what was happening in the ancient church. Sometimes it's called passing the peace. It doesn't even need to be a literal kiss or an air kiss. It could be a handshake, a hug, a fist bump. It could be a wave, a greeting. There's so many different kinds. The greeting itself really doesn't matter. What's important is the heart behind it. It's intended to be a signifier of real, deep, peace-loving relationship in the church. So what do you do? Or what do you need to do after having heard what the Apostle Paul says today about living at peace with each other? If you have been disruptive in the church family in the past, do you need to apologize? Is there a broken relationship you need to make right? Maybe with someone who no longer attends Faith Church. Maybe they don't attend because of you. You need to make more of an effort to deepen your relationships in the church. Do you need to get involved in a group where you pursue those deeper connections? What is your next step? I encourage you to take time and wrestle with that, answer that question, so that we can continue and we can even deepen living at peace with each other.